My upgrades are Invincible, Chapter 1, Fan Fiction, by Azazyel. The back streets of Orario, especially in the alleys, were a hellhole of crime and desperation, with the inhabitants that weren't worthy of joining a Familia congregated to be miserable and take said misery out on others. My fucking shoes. Really? I asked, flabbergasted, as the damned midget / pallum held me at knife point. No, the dirty child-looking being held me at jagged glass point, as the pallum had seemingly bound the jagged hunk of glass in some cloth to protect their hand from the large shard of glass. When I landed in Damachi, I was so damned excited. I could meet some great waifus, I could join a familia and become superhuman, etc. But when I finally got to the guild, from where I was randomly dropped in the middle of some small park, and sleeping against a tree, I was firmly reminded of how Orario was called the City of Dreams. And just like dreams, they were ephemeral things, as the guild said, with the food shortage going on due to a Rakia invasion as well as the unrest from other events, that all the familias within the guild register were full of recruits and were no longer recruiting. Sure, some familias were eternally recruiting, but I utterly refused to go anywhere near the meat grinder that was the entertainment district familias like Ishtar's. So here I was being held up at knife point by a fucking dirty ripoff of a hobbit for my tennis shoes that it most certainly couldn't even wear. Look. I got denied at every turn by every familia I tried talking to. I said, and the childlike face sneered at my answer, but then froze as I leaned closer and continued with a stone-cold face that I practiced from seeing Cartel and other psycho dudes on TV. I am so very frustrated at this moment, so here is what is going to happen. You can and maybe will end up stabbing me with that hunk of dirty glass, but even if I bleed out like a stuck pig, I am going to grab your head by your greasy-ass hair, and then I am going to drown you in that rain barrel over there while your tiny legs kick in the air as your midget ass can't reach the ground. Do you still want to do this? I asked bluntly, and the pallum looked at the homemade knife and then slowly took a step back, shaking their head. No, you aren't an easy mark. Not worth it. At their words, I blinked as it came out distinctively feminine, but with the pallum's thick jacket and clothes, I previously couldn't tell what gender the pallum was, though it made little difference to me. Then get out of here, I said tiredly as I leaned up against the wall of the alley and cupped my face as I tried to figure out what I was supposed to do. Are you new to Orario or something? This is Soma territory. You should get out of here if you don't want to get shot by some junkie with a bow so they can loot your corpse easily, hahaha. The pallum said, laughing at the thought as she slinked back deeper into the alley, making me sigh, and then after a moment of thought, I decided to just say fuck it. I was special enough to get iced. I don't need to get my fucking hand held, I thought with mental fortitude and spite more than anything filling my heart, and as I reached outwards I felt the heat within my chest, and as my hand took up a wooden pole that probably belonged to a broom or rake, making me realize what my cheat was. The sum of many is better than one combined to infinity, I muttered as I seemingly unlocked my cheat that did two things, being a small pocket space about 3 meters squared that allowed me to fuse the stuff within the pocket space with the objects being forcibly combined into something better than the sum of its parts. Silently I pocketed a bunch of trash and debris in the alleyway, and I mentally watched as, almost like a gotcha game, all the wood and metal scrapes combined together into a spear that I tried to envision was about 2 meters long with a plain but sharp and thick spear blade atop the dense wooden handle. But even as I held the spear, I had some doubts. Like, should I even share this secret to join a familia, and could those gods who bind my soul with their divine tramp stamp fuck with my cheat? At the thought of losing my cheat, the prospect of joining a familia lost a lot of its draw. The whole point of a cheat was to help someone reach their full potential and break the world over their knees, and the simple possibility of one of the cruel gods fucking with it. Yeah, I'd rather not chance it for now, I realized. So, with that, I decided to just make my own way until, or even if I found a god or goddess trustworthy enough. Sure, Hestia was a basic, easy option, but I didn't want to get dragged into Belle shenanigans until I got my feet under me. Another 5 minutes later I made my way across Orario to get back to the Tower of Babel, and as I stared into the massive pit that led into the heart of the dungeon, I took a deep breath with my spear at my side, and I heard some guys chuckling at the sight of me who was obviously a rookie with how I was armed with such a basic spear and only a thick leather apron thing I tied around my chest and a collar to protect my neck. Dude, is it your first time or something? A guy behind me wearing plate mail asked as I was walking down into the dungeon, and between steps, I said yes. Huh, Well, in that case having a spear is a smart choice, especially if you just stick to the first floor, as the goblins and kobolds, even if you just got your fauna, won't be an issue so long as you don't get ganged up on. The man said, and then the rest of the walk was silent, as though it was clear they were friendly people that obviously weren't going to babysit me or anything. Coming into the first floor of the dungeon, which consisted of rather thin tunnels that were like 5 meters wide and a bit taller with soft blue glowing lights dotting the walls, I separated from the trail of adventurers going deeper into the dungeon as I went into one of the side tunnels while marking on some paper the direction I was going so I didn't get lost. "There's one," I muttered, seeing the singular goblin literally bending over to look imperceptibly down a different hallway. I took a deep breath as I approached the goblin that was looking down the tunnel, and when my feet naturally alerted the goblin, it whirled around and I saw how the goblin had 3 small like bladed horns on its head, and its lower body was covered with a thick fur, and being a dungeon monster obviously had glowing red eyes showing its connection to the dungeon. The goblin screeched at me and then sprinted at me with its thin-fingered hands raised as it leaped at me, with its short 4-foot-tall frame, with its hands closing to obviously go for my neck. But the goblin was, to put bluntly, stupid as fuck, as even as it brainlessly charged at me with only the intent of killing me, I just had to angle the spear so it would ram into its own chest into the spear. I grunted as the goblin's rib cage resisted the spear point for a second before breaking, and my spearing pushed all the way through the goblin's chest and going out the back of it, but even as my spear went through the goblin's lungs, the monster only vomited blood, freezing for a moment before its mind, clouded by the dungeon, just went right back to trying to kill me. So it literally slid down the length of my spear, coating the wooden handle in its blood as it tried to get to me. But a cracking noise rang out as I smashed the brick I had in my pocket space into the goblin's face, and I both heard and felt its nose give way under the weight of the brick with the force of my hand added to it, and then as the goblin reared back with its eyes blinded by tears at its smashed nose, I held the brick by the sides and slammed it into the goblin's throat, and once again I felt bones and cartilage give way under the blunt force of the brick. Finally, I managed to pull out my spear as the goblin held its neck as it couldn't breathe with its windpipe smashed, and then with a grunt I stabbed the goblin straight through the eye, making it flail for a second before dropping still with the occasional shudder as its monstrous brain kept it active for but a couple of moments before stilling. For a whole minute, I just got my breath back as I realized how that goblin, even being only like some 4 feet tall, was strong for its size. No wonder they said that dungeon goblins could kill an adult who was caught unaware. It was as strong as a good-sized human teenager, but with it having zero care for its health, and had all of its strength, unlike a human body that naturally limits it. A simple goblin was actually as dangerous as a rabid wolf or something. Then, as I stared at the corpse of the monster and took in its bare form and ignored its genitalia, I took a breath as I was momentarily lost on what to do. Should I cut open the goblin for a monster stone worth damn near nothing? Or... Wordlessly I dumped the corpse of the goblin into my pocket space with my spear, and then with a thought I combined them, and the spear came out with the head of the spear becoming a tri-pointed blade similar to a goblin's head, along with the handle of the spear becoming covered in the dense fur that covered the lower body of the goblin, and I realized that the rough fur gave the spear an even better grip.